Everybody, Andy here again. Well, I just made a particular video and I thought of another point around it actually. I was talking about the Punk Britannia season that I'd watched recently on the TV, and there was another series about the 70s as well, called, I think it was just called the 70s, a documentary series charting the whole of the 70s and how it was periods of upheaval, the political history, social history, that type of thing as well. And maybe I'm biased because I was a teenager in the 70s, and that was, you know, the time that I was at school, secondary school, leaving school, starting work and all that type of thing. But I still think of that decade with a huge amount of fondness, with all the music and everything that came out of it. But what struck me from both of those programmes was all the old archive footage, not of the bands, but the social side of it, and looking at the way that Britain was at that time in the 70s. And you forget how much of a sort of a dark and a desolate place it was, both politically and also just looking around the way it was. There was all the strikes and everything that went on, and there were piles of rubbish in the streets, and there were 3-day weeks, and, you know, power going off regularly and all that type of thing. That side of it, yes, which was different to what we've experienced certainly since then, but also what the cities were like in those times. Because the cities then were wastelands, a lot of them. They were still leftover bomb sites and wastelands left over from the Second World War, which ended sort of 20 years, 30 years beforehand. And I've forgotten about that. I can remember walking through the city of Liverpool in the sort of mid to late 70s, and I was amazed at what it was like. That isn't an exception by any means. That's what I remember. But you look at that footage in Manchester, it was smog. In other places, it was the same. In London, it was right across the country, and it's so hard to think back to those times. We now look now, because people have said to me, yeah, but it's like that now, isn't it, Andy, with the government and that? Yes, there are dark and desolate times around now, but things do look a bit more bright and sparkly. Not everywhere, I admit, but I don't think they look anywhere near like they did back then. And in those times, one of the reasons that all that sort of music came about, not so much the classic rock, but maybe the glam stuff as a type of escape, but certainly the punk era and what that threw up and what that brought out afterwards, was that sense, you know, the old teenagers moan now, we haven't got anything to do, we're bored. Well, back then, yes, I'm harking back, yes, I know, you hark at the old man, going back to those days. It was different. We had like 2 or 3 TV stations, if we were lucky. I think it was 3 at the time, the maximum. And they shut down at about 11 o'clock at night, and you had the national anthem. You didn't have 9 o'clock, or maybe even after that in the morning. You didn't have breakfast television news, that type of thing. And so we didn't have this, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have any way really of getting our thoughts out there like I can do now. There wasn't an outlet for your creativity, if you want to put it that way. If you wanted to blog or do something like that, you couldn't do it apart from your own personal diaries, which were personal and therefore you weren't showing to anyone. There was no real way of getting your thoughts out there in any sphere, in any type of media. Hence the fact that the punk revolution kick-started that whole type of thing, and people thought, oh, I can do that, I'll have a go at that, and either producing music or art, photography, magazines, fanzines, books, whatever it might be, started up a whole revolution, which is still being felt now. And I do believe that the internet revolution came about partly, or maybe it was accelerated a little bit by some of the people that came out of that. So yes, maybe I'm looking back through rose-tinted spectacles to an extent, but certainly not in others. And maybe you've got your decade. As I said, I'm biased, obviously, because I was born and raised at that particular time, and that's the time that I think. But I can't think of another decade, really, that's had the music. Certainly, yes, I know the 60s had a certain amount of change, but I think the 70s was just as influential in the way that changed things. I know other people will chime in with their own decades. If you were around in the 80s or the 90s, you may well think that was your era as well, and why not? So let me know. But there you go, I still think the 70s were bloody good. And I'm glad that I grew up in that time, was around in that time, and you know, we can forget all the nasty stuff and just remember the great music and everything else that it brought out of it as well. And don't forget the TV and Monty Python and all those sort of things. Oh, God, dear, I could go on forever. Thanks for your time. I'll speak to you again soon. Goodbye.